Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here. We have the whole national security establishment of the country, so hopefully we can get some good answers to my questions. Minister, there was a pretty groundbreaking decision earlier this month of the Supreme Court, the Bayevitz decision. I wonder if you can tell us about what the impact of that decision has been in the last month.
So again, I'm not familiar with the precise details of the decision. Happy to answer Mr. Lloyd's question, but the Associate Deputy Minister would be the best one to give you the precise answer to your question.
Thank you. And, going into the decision, the Bayevitz decision is in regards to Internet Protocol addresses, IP addresses. And these IP addresses are essential tools, essential evidence for our law enforcement to track down and prosecute child predators. Under the Supreme Court decision, it has now been ruled that there's a judicial authorization required in order to get those IP addresses. It's the equivalent of saying you need a search warrant to look in the phone book. This decision has had an immediate effect on basically freezing and, in the words of some RCMP officers, terminating child predator investigations in Canada. And some believe that Canada has now become the safest place in the world to be a child predator. I wonder if you can give your comments on that, Minister.
Well, that obviously would not be a circumstance that's at all acceptable. I am informed that the RCMP and CSIS are obviously looking at the court decision and determining, based on some legal advice, the operational impacts of that decision. Getting access to an IP address, I wouldn't have compared to looking in a phone book. I think that's a little bit disingenuous. These are areas that are governed by law and a body of case law. But we recognize that the police, the RCMP and other police partners, and CSIS, in the case of national security investigations, need appropriate access to that information, and will take whatever steps are necessary to ensure that the police have access to that information, while obviously respecting the Charter of Rights and cases that
thank
the
you,
courts
Minister,
will decide.
for that. And I'm not that reassured because we do have RCMP officers who are speaking out already on this. They spoke out earlier this month, and they said Canada must act quickly. This ruling opens a huge gap in our ability to protect kids and stop offenders from preying on them. There must always be a balance between citizen privacy and the state. But in the words of this RCMP officer, who is on Twitter, Sergeant Carrie Shima, this decision has put our children in the crosshairs. Those are the words of RCMP officers on the front lines. It's now been 3 weeks. Your government has now unveiled massive new legislation, the Online Harms Act, and yet I can find nothing in your Online Harms Act that deals with the fallout from this very concerning decision, which, in the words of an RCMP officer, has essentially terminated investigations into online sex offenders and identifying child victims. We cannot allow our country to be a safe haven for child predators. What are we going to do about this immediately, Minister?
So, Mr. Chair, I share, obviously, Mr. Lloyd's view that we can't allow Canada to become a safe haven for child predators. That's a circumstance that would be obviously completely inappropriate. I have confidence that the RCMP, respecting the law, respecting decisions of the Supreme Court and the Charter, will come to the government with advice, as will CSIS, on the most appropriate way to ensure that they have the tools to do that exact work that Mr. Lloyd correctly identified. And perhaps the Commissioner or others can discuss this in the second part. But, Mr. Chair, I think the important principle is that in a case where an important Supreme Court decision reviews authorities
Sorry,
like
Minister,
that.
I do only have about a minute left. I just want to say, how far are you willing to go to protect the children in this country? Would you be willing to consider using the notwithstanding clause if that were the only option to allow prosecutors or allow RCMP to do these investigations?
We're obviously not going to answer hypothetical questions like that. Our views in terms of the notwithstanding clause are well known. I think Mr. Lloyd is well ahead of himself in concluding that the advice that I'm going to get as Minister with my colleague, the Minister...
I'm not making any conclusions, Minister.
Mr. Lloyd, you asked me a question.
How far you're willing to go to protect children in this country? Is that
do everything that we lawfully can to protect children and support the women and men in the RCMP and CSIS and other agencies that do this important work. They are doing effective and good work in this area.
They can't,
and the government's job is to ensure they have the resources and the authorities to do that work.
Thank you.
Thank you.